In this video, we're going to be looking at arrays inside of PHP and how we can use them, initialize them, and more. Why is that important? Well, because there's a couple different ways. So let's get started. So inside of PHP, we have, like I mentioned, a couple different ways to initialize array. And that's because arrays in PHP are very flexible in what we can do and how we do them. So I have an array that I'm going to create, and I'm going to call this numbers. Why? Well, I'm going to go and assign some numbers to it. And if you're used to using something like C++, you're going to find this real familiar. I simply say my variable name equals and some square brackets, and I start giving it some values. Each value is separated by a comma. At the end, I'm going to put a semicolon, and I have an array, my array of numbers. Now, there's a real quick and easy way to display all the values in my arrays. Now, I can use for loops and stuff like that, and that's definitely clean, but there's easy too. And sometimes easy and fast are synonymous. Now, easy and fast in this case are synonymous, and so I'm going to show you this little trick. I'm going to say var dump. And you might say, well, what is this? Well, it's going to take in a value and it's going to dump all that value and information to my string. So var dump numbers. And if I reload this file, you'll see that it automatically gives you some information. It's an array. It has a size associated with it. Each index, okay, is 0 through 4. And it gives me the fact that these are integer values and what those values are. So vardump is actually kind of useful if I'm doing some complicated debugging in PHP because it gives me all my information right there. And in our case, it's really simple, and that's what we like. So let's look at some other types of arrays because I said that there was multiple ways to initialize and use arrays. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper into this. Okay, so what happens if I want to add a value to my array? Now, in some languages like C++, I can't do that. My array is set. Once I create it, it is that big. I'm going to say numbers and do my square angle brackets like this equals 12. Come back here. If I reload my file, you'll notice that now I have an index of 12 there. All I had to do was put the square brackets, and it knows to append it to the end of my array. That makes it really easy to use and dynamically add content to an array inside of PHP. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is obviously it's appending it to the end. So we want to work with that. All right, what happens if I want to change a value in the center of it, though? Well, I'm going to say numbers 2 is going to equal 3. If I come here and I reload this, you'll notice that my index 2, all right, and so it's index 2. Remember, we start at index 0. 0, 1, 2 now has a value of 3. They were all even numbers before, so we can easily tell that this was changed for us. So something to keep in mind. If I come back to my file here, I do have some other things I can do. I have some array-related functions that are built in. For example, I can do array push, $numbers, and I can give a new value. This is going to have the same effect as my line 3, though. If I go and reload it, you'll notice it just automatically gets added to the end. There's other functions that we can work with, and you can take a look at those on your own if you're interested in working with arrays. Right now, I want to show you another way that we can initialize array. Something that you might see. It's a little bit more challenging, but it's still used quite a bit. So I'm going to come back here to my source code. In this case, I'm going to create an array of letters. And you'll notice instead of using my square brackets, I use an array function. And just as with before, in this case, I'm creating my letters. I'm separating them out by commas. Each letter, or it could be a string, as these are technically all strings, is going to show up inside of single quotes. I could have used double quotes, does not matter. I'm just going to copy and paste my letters into my vardump. Now you'll see when I reload this file, it's showing string A, and it even gives me a length of my string. There's no char type of data type inside of PHP like there is in C, so we're defining it as a string and we're using it here as such. Now, if I had longer strings, it would give me longer lengths, and it's just a matter of what type of string we put in. Once again, this is kind of just a nice little advantage to something that you might find inside of a var dump and how you can use that. Now, if I come here and I want to create another array, in this case, I'm going to do something called values. And once again, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use my square brackets. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. If I var dump my values, what do you think it's going to display? I don't have any information in it. My array is empty. And if I come here and I reload it, you'll notice that's exactly what it tells me. I have an empty array. The size is equal to 0, and it shows empty. So that's a really obvious but quite actually useful piece of information. It lets me know that my array is empty. I can go in and add values if I want to. So here's Bob, 42, false, and I'm going to give it a decimal number, 3.141592. You might go, wait a second, here's some varying types of information. You can't put that in an array, and if you're used to using arrays inside of something like C or Java, you know because it is type restricted, those arrays can only have one data type. But PHP is dynamically typed. And that means that it can actually allow you to have an array with multiple types of data. So if I refresh the screen, notice that it's going to show me my first element is a string, Bob. How long is it? It's got a length of 3. Then it has an integer, 42. Then it's going to show, oh, we're holding Boolean false, and then we have a float number. And so it gives me all these data types and allows me to mix and match. Every element can be a different data type. Now, I can have the same data type repeated. I could have some where I'm not using certain data types. In fact, there's some data types that aren't in this example. But it allows me to have a lot of flexibility with how I use my arrays. And if you think that that's pretty cool and that's all you need to know, well, there's one more thing I want to show you real quick. And that is the fact that an array inside of PHP does not have to be indexed. Now, you might say, well, what do you mean it doesn't have to be indexed? You have to have an index. You have to know what element you're working with, unless you're using something called an associative array. An associative array allows you to define a key with a value. Now, other languages have different names for them. Python and Visual Basic refer to this as a dictionary object. But in PHP, it's an associative array, and so it's very easy to work with it, just as if you work with a regular array. I'm going to come over here real quick. I'm going to create an array called associative. Define this as an array. And I'm just going to put this on multiple lines so it's really easy to read. Remember, a lot of times we do things in programming that makes it easier for us to read, modify, debug, etc. Never do things that make your life harder as a programmer. Always work on ways to have clean code that's easy to maintain. So I'm going to put each of my elements on a separate line. And I'm going to specify first Bob. Now we saw Bob before, and we're going to give it a value of 42. Going to put a comma. Now, before I go into my next line, I want to show you what we did here. I have on my left side Bob, and then I have an equal and then a greater than symbol. And this is saying I want Bob to be associated with 42. Bob is my key. 42 is the value stored in my array at the key of Bob. Now, I can have other things in here. For example, here's Fred. Fred is 1965. Completely different. It's a whole different type of number. Here's Sally. Let me give her a different type of value. So instead of being a bigger integer, Sally's going to be equal to true. And with Mary, I can give a floating point number. And let's do one more. Martha as the president. Now, quick copy and paste. My vardump is now going to put in associative. Switch over to my browser. Reload this. Notice that my vardump figures out how big my associative array is. It's got 5 elements. It notices I have different types of data. The first 2 are integers, then a boolean, then a float. And when I get to the string, it tells me how long the string is. Now, I typically want to keep the same type of values in with my type of keys. I want to generally keep the same type of keys in. Usually you're going to find your keys are going to be strings. But in either way, it's very, very simple to work with. Let's take a look real quick though at Bob. Bob has a completely different number, 42 compared to Fred, which is 1965. So let's change Bob to have a larger number, like a year that you might expect. So you might say, well, how can I do that? Well, it's very simple working with an associative array. So I have my array that I'm referencing. Then I'm going to specify Bob. Remember, Bob is a string, so I need to put it inside of my values there. And I'm going to give it a new value, 1977. Now, just out of curiosity, what happens if I did Bob all lowercase? Well, let's do a quick test so we can see. And we'll give it a new value, 1985. So let's go back to my browser, reload. Notice that Bob is now showing 1977, and I added a Bob all lowercase to instead 1985. Well, if I look at the end, here's my lowercase Bob. So my keys are actually case sensitive, and that's what this shows. So I can change a value in my associative array by referencing the key. I can be able to print them out by referencing the key and getting that value. So I can change my values, but my keys are case sensitive. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind when I'm working with an array that's an associative array. Because I can be typing along real quick and go, oops, not even realizing that I miscapitalized something, and I can introduce an error. So the vardump is actually a good way to go and check for that if I'm dealing with a small amount of data. Now, if I have an associative array that's got thousands of pieces of data in it, that's going to be a different story. I'm going to need to be on top of my game when I'm writing this code. So it all kind of depends upon what you're doing and how you're doing it and why in order to make it work. But that's how we're going to use an associative array inside of PHP and how it provides a lot of functionality and flexibility when you're using your arrays, whether it's a regular indexed array or the associative array.